Lauren Mitchell opened her eyes to another morning in her luxury apartment on Elysium Prime, the massive space station that orbited Earth like a glittering jewel in the darkness of space. The walls of her room were made of smart glass that could display any view she wanted, but today she kept them clear so she could see the stars. She had been born here 23 years ago, and she had been born with legs that would never work. Her parents were among the wealthiest people in the solar system, owning mining operations on 3 different planets and controlling trade routes that stretched across multiple star systems. They had given her everything money could buy, the best education, the finest clothes, access to every luxury that existed in the 24th century. But they could not give her the one thing she wanted most, the ability to walk like everyone else. Her condition was rare, so rare that doctors had given it a special name that she could never remember. In an age where medical science could cure almost any disease and fix almost any injury, her nervous system simply refused to cooperate with any treatment. They had tried everything when she was young: surgeries, gene therapy, neural implants, experimental drugs from the outer colonies. Nothing worked. Her legs remained as useless as the day she was born. So instead she lived her life in a hoverpod, a sleek machine that looked like a floating chair made of silver metal and blue lights. It responded to her thoughts through a neural interface implanted behind her ear, moving wherever she wanted to go without her ever having to touch the ground. Lauren got ready for the day with the help of her automated systems, machines that dressed her and prepared her breakfast while she checked her messages. Today was important. Her parents had scheduled another appointment with specialists on Earth, the homeworld that most people on the orbital stations only visited for business or medical reasons. She had been to Earth twice before, and both times she had hated it. The gravity felt wrong after living her whole life in the controlled environment of the station, and the crowds of people made her uncomfortable. But her mother insisted that these new doctors had a procedure that might finally work, and Lauren had learned long ago that arguing with her mother was pointless. The journey from Elysium Prime to Earth took 6 hours on the private shuttle her family owned. Lauren spent most of that time reading research papers about alien ruins, the field she had chosen to study at the university. She was fascinated by the ancient civilizations that had existed millions of years before humans ever left Earth, and she had published several papers that even her professors admitted were brilliant. But her parents thought it was just a hobby, something to keep her busy until they found a way to fix her legs. They did not understand that her work was the only thing that made her feel like she was more than just a broken girl in a floating chair. The shuttle landed at the private spaceport in New Seattle, a massive city that sprawled across what used to be the Pacific Northwest. The city was built in layers, with the wealthy living in towers that reached into the clouds while the poor lived in the streets below. Lauren's family had an apartment in one of the highest towers, but she rarely stayed there. Today they were going straight to the medical center, another sterile building where doctors would poke and prod her while pretending they were not disappointed that she was not already cured. But something went wrong during the descent through the city. The transport vehicle that was supposed to carry her from the spaceport to the medical center malfunctioned halfway there, its engines sputtering and dying. The driver managed to land safely in a commercial plaza in the middle layers of the city, but now they were stuck. Lauren's security team immediately went to work calling for another vehicle, while she waited in her hoverpod, watching the crowds of people walking past. She had never been this close to ordinary people before, not without walls of security keeping them at a distance. The plaza was busy with afternoon shoppers and workers on their lunch breaks. Lauren watched them with fascination, the way they moved so easily, the way they ran and jumped and walked without even thinking about it. Children played near a fountain, splashing each other and laughing. A young couple held hands as they looked at shop windows. An old man sat on a bench feeding birds, all of them doing something she had never done, touching the ground with their own feet, feeling the surface of the world beneath them. That was when she noticed the boy watching her from across the plaza. He was young, maybe 13 or 14 years old, with dark skin and short black hair. His clothes were old and patched in several places, and his shoes looked like they were held together with tape. He carried a backpack that was almost as big as he was, and he had the careful look of someone who had learned to watch everything around him. But what struck Lauren most was that he was not looking at her with pity or curiosity. He was looking at her hoverpod with the focused attention of someone who understood machines. Lauren's security drones beeped a warning as the boy started walking toward her. The small flying machines moved between her and the approaching stranger, their red lights flashing. But Lauren waved them away with a thought, curious about what this boy wanted. He stopped a few feet away, a respectful distance, and pointed at her hover pod. His voice was clear and confident when he spoke, not intimidated by her expensive equipment or her obvious wealth. He told her that her pod was not working right, that the stabilizers were damaged and getting worse. Lauren checked her display and realized he was correct. The malfunction had caused more damage than her team had thought. She asked him how he knew about hoverpods, and he introduced himself as Marcus. He explained that he used to work in repair shops in the lower city, fixing all kinds of machines before the shops closed down. Then he asked her a question that no one had ever asked before. He asked if she had ever walked, and when she shook her head, he smiled and made an offer that would change everything. He offered to help her, not with fixing her legs, but with understanding what it meant to walk through the world instead of floating above it. Lauren stared at Marcus for a long moment, trying to understand what he meant. Her security team was still scrambling to arrange new transportation, talking urgently into their communication devices while keeping nervous eyes on the growing crowd around their stranded vehicle. They kept telling her it would just be a few more minutes, but she could tell from their voices that it would be longer than that. The commercial plaza was getting busier as the afternoon wore on, and Lauren found herself less interested in leaving, and more interested in what this strange boy was offering. Marcus stood patiently waiting for her answer, his hands in his pockets and his backpack hanging off one shoulder. He did not look nervous or intimidated by her wealth or her security team. He just looked like someone who had made an offer and was waiting to see if it would be accepted. Lauren realized that this was probably the first time in her life that someone had offered to show her something without expecting anything in return. Everyone in her world wanted something, money or connections or favors. But this homeless boy just wanted to show her the city. Against every rule her parents had taught her, and certainly against the advice her security team would give if she asked, Lauren made a decision. She told Marcus that she would like to see what he wanted to show her. She instructed her security team to follow at a distance and not to interfere unless she was in actual danger. The head of her security team, a stern woman named Kate, protested loudly and said this was a terrible idea. But Lauren was 23 years old and technically an adult, so Kate could not actually stop her. The security drones would follow and monitor everything, and Kate would be right behind with the rest of the team. Marcus smiled and started walking, and Lauren's hoverpod glided smoothly after him. They left the commercial plaza and headed toward the lower levels of the city, the parts that Lauren had only seen from above when her transport vehicles flew past. The streets got narrower and darker as they descended, the buildings older and more worn. But Lauren also noticed things she had never seen before: small gardens growing on balconies, colorful murals painted on walls, and people who greeted Marcus by name as they passed. The first place Marcus took her was a community garden built on the roof of an old parking structure. Dozens of people were working together, planting vegetables and fruit trees in raised beds made from recycled materials. An older woman named Susan explained that the garden provided fresh food for hundreds of families in the neighborhood, food that they could not afford to buy in the expensive stores in the upper city. Lauren watched as people of all ages worked side by side, their hands dirty with soil, their faces focused on the task. She realized she had never actually seen food being grown before. Everything she ate came from automated systems or was prepared by chefs. These people were creating something with their own hands. Marcus led her down more streets, pointing out things she would never have noticed on her own. He showed her a small clinic where volunteer doctors treated people who could not afford the expensive medical centers like the one Lauren was supposed to visit. He showed her a library where children came after school because their families did not have computers at home. He showed her a workshop where people repaired old machines and electronics, making broken things work again instead of just throwing them away and buying new ones. In the orbital stations, everything was perfect and new and efficient. Down here, nothing was perfect, but Lauren saw something she had never seen before. People working together, helping each other, building a community from whatever they could find. As they walked, Marcus talked about his life in a way that was honest but not asking for pity. He explained that he had been living on the streets for 2 years, since his mother got sick and died and he had no other family to take care of him. He survived by fixing things for people, earning a few credits here and there. He slept in shelters when there was space or in safe spots he had found around the city when there was not. He was teaching himself engineering from books he borrowed from the library, hoping that someday he could save enough money to get into a real school. Lauren asked him why he stayed in the lower city, instead of trying to get a job in the upper levels where he could make more money. Marcus stopped walking and looked at her with an expression that was patient and a little sad. He explained that the upper city did not hire people like him, homeless kids with no credentials and no connections. He said the system was designed to keep people where they were born, the rich staying rich and the poor staying poor. But down here in the lower city, people looked out for each other. Down here he had friends in a community. Down here he mattered. They reached a place where the street opened into a small square with benches and trees. Marcus sat down on one of the benches and gestured for Lauren to join him. Her hoverpod settled into a stable position next to the bench, keeping her at roughly the same height as Marcus. For a while they just sat in silence watching people pass by. Lauren noticed how everyone moved. The old woman with a cane who took careful steps, the young man who ran past with a bag of groceries, the little girl who skipped and hopped and jumped for no reason except that she could. She had watched people walk before, but she had always watched from a distance. Now she was sitting among them, and it felt different. Marcus broke the silence by asking her what her life was like on the orbital station. Lauren found herself talking more honestly than she usually did. She told him about the isolation, how everyone treated her like she was fragile and broken. She told him about her studies and how much she loved learning about ancient civilizations, but also how her parents saw it as just a distraction. She told him about all the medical procedures that had failed and how each failure made her feel more hopeless. She even told him something she had never told anyone, that sometimes she felt like she was not really part of humanity at all, just an observer floating above it, never quite touching the ground. Marcus listened without interrupting, and when she finished, he nodded slowly. Then he said something that stuck with Lauren for a long time afterward. He said that walking was not really about legs, it was about moving through the world as part of it, instead of separate from it. He said that plenty of people had working legs but never really walked because they never let themselves feel the ground beneath them, never let themselves be touched by the struggles and joys around them. He said that Lauren had been floating above the world not just because of her hoverpod, but because her wealth and privilege kept her separate from real human experience. The sun was starting to set over New Seattle, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that filtered down between the buildings. Lauren had been with Marcus for almost 3 hours now, and her security team had sent her at least 20 messages asking when she wanted to return to the medical center. She had ignored all of them. For the first time in her life, she was experiencing something real, something that was not carefully planned and controlled by her parents or scheduled by assistants. She was simply existing in the world, watching it flow around her. Marcus suggested they get something to eat, and Lauren agreed even though she was not particularly hungry. He led her to a small food stall run by an elderly man who Marcus called by name. The man served simple meals from ingredients he prepared himself, nothing like the elaborate dishes Lauren was used to eating. Marcus ordered 2 bowls of soup and some bread, paying with a handful of small credit chips that he counted out carefully. When Lauren offered to pay, Marcus shook his head and said this was his treat. She realized that those few credits probably represented a significant portion of what he had earned that week, and she felt something unfamiliar twist in her chest. They ate sitting on a bench near the food stall, and Lauren was surprised by how good the simple soup tasted. It was warm and filling, made with vegetables and beans and spices that she could not identify. Marcus told her that the old man who ran the stall was named George, and that he fed anyone who was hungry even if they could not pay. George had been a chef at a fancy restaurant in the upper city once, but he had retired and decided to spend his remaining years doing something that mattered more to him. Now he served the people of the lower city, asking for payment when people could afford it and giving food away when they could not. As they ate, Marcus told Lauren more about the lower city and how it worked. He explained that when the government or the corporations failed to provide what people needed, the community found ways to take care of itself. There were networks of people who shared food and clothing, volunteers who taught classes and provided child care, and groups who looked out for the homeless and the vulnerable. It was not a perfect system, and people still struggled and suffered, but there was something beautiful about the way people helped each other, not because they had to, but because they chose to. Lauren found herself thinking about her own life, about all the resources and wealth her family controlled. They owned entire mining operations that extracted valuable minerals from distant planets. They had enough money to fund research projects and build new technologies. But what did they actually do with all that power? Her father spent his time making more money, expanding the business, competing with other wealthy families. Her mother focused on social status, attending parties and maintaining connections with other elite families. Neither of them seemed to think about the people in places like this, the ones who were struggling just to survive. After they finished eating, Marcus asked Lauren if she wanted to see where he stayed at night. She hesitated for a moment, knowing that Kate and the security team would absolutely hate this idea, but she was too curious to refuse. Marcus led her deeper into the lower city, down streets that got progressively darker and quieter. Finally, they reached an old subway station that had been closed years ago when the city built a new transportation system. The entrance was hidden behind a fence with a hole cut in it, just big enough for people to slip through. Marcus went first, and Lauren's hoverpod had to adjust its position to fit through the opening, scraping slightly against the metal. Inside the abandoned station, Lauren saw something that shocked her. The large underground space had been converted into a makeshift shelter, and there were at least 200 people living there. Families had claimed spaces along the walls, hanging sheets and blankets to create private areas. There were children playing in the open spaces, their laughter echoing off the tile walls. Someone had set up a small kitchen area where volunteers were preparing food in large pots. Another section had been turned into a medical area where a tired-looking doctor was examining a sick child. The whole place smelled of too many people living in too small a space, but it was clean and organized, and people greeted Marcus warmly as he passed. Marcus introduced Lauren to several people, including a woman named Angela who seemed to be one of the organizers of the shelter. Angela explained that the city knew about this place but mostly left them alone as long as they did not cause problems. There were dozens of similar shelters scattered throughout the lower city, hidden in abandoned buildings and forgotten spaces. The official homeless shelters run by the government were overcrowded and dangerous, so people had created their own alternatives. Angela spoke with pride about how the community governed itself, settling disputes peacefully and making sure everyone followed basic rules of respect and safety. Lauren was overwhelmed by what she was seeing. In all her education, in all her studies of history and alien civilizations, she had never really understood what poverty meant. She had known intellectually that most of humanity lived nothing like she did, but knowing something and seeing it were completely different things. These were not statistics or distant problems. These were real people with names and faces, people who laughed and cried and loved and struggled. They were living entire lives in the shadows of the towers where people like Lauren floated by without ever looking down. Marcus led her to a corner where he had claimed a small space for himself. It was barely big enough for him to lie down, with his few possessions stored in his backpack and a thin sleeping bag rolled up against the wall. But next to his space sat an old man who Marcus introduced as Pete, and Pete had something that immediately captured Lauren's attention. Spread out on a piece of cloth in front of Pete was a collection of strange objects that Lauren recognized from her studies. They were alien artifacts, pieces of technology from civilizations that had died millions of years before humans ever existed. Lauren asked Pete where he had gotten these objects, trying to keep the excitement out of her voice. Pete explained that he explored the deep tunnels beneath the city, places that had been built on top of even older structures going back thousands of years. Sometimes he found ruins from early human settlements, but occasionally he found things that were much older, remnants of alien civilizations that had visited Earth long ago. Most people thought he was crazy, but Pete had been a scientist once before he lost everything, and he knew what he was looking at. Lauren examined the artifacts carefully, her academic training taking over. Most of them were fragments, broken pieces of larger devices that were now useless. But one object caught her attention and made her heart beat faster. It was a small cylinder about the size of her hand, made of a material that seemed to shift colors in the light. She had seen something similar in research papers from excavations on distant planets, and the scientists who studied it believed it was some kind of neural interface device. The aliens who made it had technology far beyond what humans currently possessed. Technology that could interact directly with biological nervous systems. Pete told her he had found the cylinder in a sealed chamber 50 levels below the city, in a room that looked like it had been deliberately preserved. The walls of the chamber had been covered in symbols that Pete had tried to document, though he had no way to translate them. He had been carrying the cylinder with him for months, showing it to anyone who might know what it was or what it did. But most people just thought it was a piece of junk, something worthless he had pulled from the ruins. Lauren's hands were shaking as she held the cylinder. Her neural interface, the implant behind her ear that controlled her hoverpod, suddenly activated in a way it never had before. She felt a tingling sensation spread through her head, and then information started flowing into her consciousness. It was not words or images, but pure understanding, knowledge being transferred directly into her mind. The cylinder was indeed a neural device, but its purpose was far more sophisticated than anything human scientists had theorized. It was designed to repair and enhance biological neural pathways, to bridge connections that had been broken or had never formed properly. Lauren sat in the abandoned subway station holding the alien cylinder, her mind racing with possibilities. The knowledge flowing into her consciousness was fragmentary and incomplete, but she understood enough to realize what she was holding. This device could potentially do what decades of human medical science had failed to accomplish. It could create new neural pathways that would allow her brain to communicate with her legs. The alien civilization that created it had understood the nervous system at a level that humans were still trying to reach, and they had built technology that could work with biology instead of just replacing it. Pete watched her with knowing eyes, seeing the understanding dawn on her face. He asked if she knew what the device was, and Lauren explained in simple terms what her neural interface had revealed. She told him about her condition, about how her nervous system refused to connect properly with her lower body. She told him that this alien technology might be able to fix what human doctors could not. Pete nodded slowly and said he had suspected the device was medical in nature, but he had no way to test it or understand how it worked. He asked Lauren if she wanted to keep the cylinder, to study it properly with the resources and equipment she obviously had access to. Lauren should have said yes immediately. She should have taken the device, returned to her family's resources, and begun proper scientific analysis. But something made her hesitate. She looked around the shelter at all the people living in poverty, at Marcus, who had shown her this world, at Pete, who had spent months carrying this valuable artifact around without ever thinking to sell it for the small fortune it was worth. She realized that taking the device away from here would be just another example of the wealthy taking from the poor, even if Pete was willing to give it freely. Instead, Lauren made a different proposal. She asked Pete if she could study the device here in the shelter, using portable equipment she would bring. She would document everything carefully and share all her findings with Pete and anyone else who was interested. If the device could help her walk, she wanted to try using it, but she wanted to do it here among the people who had shown her what walking really meant. Pete looked surprised by the offer but agreed immediately. Marcus, who had been listening quietly, smiled in a way that told Lauren she had made the right choice. Over the next week, Lauren's life changed in ways she could never have imagined. She told her parents she was staying in New Seattle to pursue research related to her studies, which was technically true even if it was not the whole truth. They were annoyed but not particularly concerned, assuming she was working with the medical center or one of the universities. Her security team was less easy to convince, but Lauren was firm about her requirements. Kate and the others could maintain their watch, but they had to do it from a distance and not interfere with her work. Lauren brought in equipment from the university, portable scanners and analysis tools that let her study the alien cylinder in detail. She set up a small laboratory space in a corner of the shelter, and Pete helped her understand the context of where he had found the device. Together, they reviewed his photographs of the sealed chamber and the symbols on the walls. Lauren used translation software to analyze the alien writing, and slowly a picture emerged. The civilization that had left this device had visited Earth millions of years ago, during a time when early humans were just beginning to develop. They had left behind caches of technology in hidden chambers around the world, tools that would only be found by species that had advanced enough to use them properly. Marcus became Lauren's assistant in the research, his natural understanding of machines proving invaluable. He had an intuitive grasp of how systems worked together, and he could often spot problems or suggest solutions that Lauren's formal training had not prepared her for. They worked together for hours each day, carefully testing the device and trying to understand its function. The alien technology responded to neural interfaces like the one Lauren had, creating a connection that allowed for limited communication. The device was not just a tool, it was almost alive in some way, designed to adapt to the specific biological system it was trying to help. During breaks from the research, Marcus continued to show Lauren the lower city. She met more people and heard more stories, each one adding to her understanding of how most of humanity actually lived. She helped serve food in the shelter kitchen and listened to children read in the makeshift library. She watched the community come together to solve problems, to support families in crisis, to celebrate small victories, and slowly, she began to understand what Marcus had meant about walking through the world instead of floating above it. Lauren also began to see the limitations and failures of the system she had always been part of. She saw how her family's wealth came from the labor of workers who were paid barely enough to survive. She saw how the corporations controlled resources and kept prices high, making basic necessities unaffordable for ordinary people. She saw how the government mostly served the interests of the wealthy, while ignoring the needs of everyone else. And she saw how, despite all these obstacles, people found ways to help each other and build lives worth living. After a week of study, Lauren believed she understood enough about the alien device to attempt using it. The process would be delicate and possibly dangerous. The device would need to integrate with her existing neural interface, then extend connections down through her spinal cord to her legs. It would essentially teach her nervous system how to do something it had never learned, creating new pathways and strengthening connections that existed only in potential. Pete had revealed during their conversations that he was not just a scientist, but had been a neural engineer before losing his career and his home. He had worked on similar projects with human technology, though nothing as advanced as the alien device. Pete agreed to guide the integration process, and Marcus insisted on being present to help. Lauren's security team strongly objected, wanting her to do this in a proper medical facility with professional doctors. But Lauren refused. She trusted Pete's knowledge and Marcus's support more than she trusted doctors who had failed her repeatedly. Besides, something about doing this here in the shelter, surrounded by people who had shown her what real humanity looked like, felt right in a way she could not fully explain. The integration began late one evening when the shelter was relatively quiet. Lauren lay on a makeshift medical bed that Pete had prepared, surrounded by monitoring equipment that would track her vital signs and neural activity. Pete carefully positioned the alien device against the neural interface port behind her ear, and it immediately bonded to her skin, as if it had been designed specifically for her. The sensation was strange but not painful, a tingling warmth that spread from the contact point through her head and down her neck. Marcus sat beside her, holding her hand, providing comfort and distraction by telling her stories about the city and the people they had met. Pete monitored the integration process carefully, watching displays that showed the device extending microscopic connections through Lauren's nervous system. It was searching, finding the pathways that existed but had never functioned properly, strengthening them and creating new connections where needed. The process took hours, and Lauren drifted in and out of awareness as the device worked. When she finally woke fully, it was early morning and dim light was filtering into the shelter through high windows. Marcus had fallen asleep in his chair, still holding her hand. Pete was reviewing data from the monitoring equipment with an expression of wonder on his face. And Lauren felt something she had never felt before, a faint tingling sensation in her legs. Not pain exactly, but awareness, proof that signals were traveling where they had never traveled before. Lauren stared at her legs, trying to process what she was feeling. The sensation was so alien that she almost did not recognize it as coming from her own body. For 23 years, everything below her waist had been silent, a part of her that existed but did not communicate. Now there were signals, faint and unclear, like hearing someone speak in a distant room, but definitely there. She tried to move her toes, concentrating as hard as she could, and thought she saw the slightest twitch in her right foot. Pete noticed it too, his eyes widening as he checked the monitors. Marcus woke up when Lauren gasped, startled by the movement she had just made. He asked if she was okay, and she laughed because she did not know how to explain what she was feeling. She was not okay in the sense of being normal or fixed, but something fundamental had changed. The device was working, creating connections and pathways that her body should have developed naturally but never had. Pete explained that the integration would take time, possibly weeks or months, as the device taught her nervous system new patterns. The alien technology was not replacing her nerves or doing the work for her. It was teaching her body how to do what it had never learned. Over the next several days, Lauren stayed in the shelter and worked with Pete on physical therapy exercises. They started with simple things, trying to tense muscles or move individual toes. Each small success felt like a miracle. Marcus helped by researching rehabilitation techniques and creating support equipment from materials they could find or buy cheaply. He built parallel bars for Lauren to hold on to, padding for her to fall on safely, and braces to support her legs while they learned to bear weight. The whole shelter community became invested in Lauren's progress, cheering for every tiny achievement and offering encouragement when she got frustrated. Learning to use her legs was the hardest thing Lauren had ever done. Her academic work had always come easily to her, but this required a type of effort she had never experienced. Every movement required conscious thought and concentration. Just sitting up without the support of her hoverpod took strength she had never needed to develop. Pete warned her that she was essentially going through the same process that babies went through when learning to walk, except she had an adult brain trying to control a body that had no muscle memory or instinctive understanding of movement. The first time Lauren tried to stand, she lasted maybe 3 seconds before her legs collapsed under her. Marcus caught her before she hit the ground, and she found herself laughing and crying at the same time. 3 seconds of standing on her own feet, feeling the floor beneath her, bearing her own weight. It was nothing and everything all at once. She tried again immediately, and this time she managed 5 seconds. By the end of that day, she could stand for almost 30 seconds while holding on to the parallel bars Marcus had built. Lauren's parents called constantly, demanding to know what she was doing and when she was coming back. She told them she was involved in important research, which was true, and that she needed more time, which was also true. Her mother was particularly upset, saying that Lauren was wasting her time in that dirty city when she should be at the medical center trying real treatments. Lauren wanted to tell her mother that she was trying a real treatment, one that was actually working, but she knew her parents would never approve. They would insist on taking control, bringing in their own doctors, moving everything to a proper facility. And somehow Lauren knew that if she let that happen, something essential would be lost. Marcus spent most of his time with Lauren now, helping her with exercises and keeping her company during the long hours of practice. They talked about everything, their childhoods, their dreams, their fears, their observations about the world. Lauren learned that Marcus wanted to be an engineer, to design systems that would help people live better lives. He had taught himself advanced mathematics and physics from library books, and his understanding of complex systems was intuitive and deep. She could not understand why someone with his intelligence and determination was living in a shelter instead of attending the best schools. When she said as much to Marcus, he smiled sadly and explained how the system worked. Schools required credentials and tuition that homeless kids could not provide. Scholarships existed but usually went to students who already had support systems and stable homes. Even if he somehow got accepted to a program, he would need a place to live, food to eat, clothes to wear, none of which he could afford. The system was designed to help people who already had advantages, not to lift up people who were struggling. The wealthy liked to believe that anyone could succeed if they just worked hard enough. But the reality was that opportunity was not distributed equally. Lauren found herself getting angry as she understood more about how things really worked. She had always known intellectually that she was privileged, but she had thought of it as just lucky circumstances. Now she understood that her privilege came at the cost of other people's struggle, that the system was designed to concentrate wealth and power in the hands of people like her family, while keeping everyone else fighting for scraps. And the worst part was that most wealthy people, including her parents, either did not know or did not care about the suffering their wealth was built on. 2 weeks after the integration, Lauren took her first step. She was holding on to the parallel bars. Pete was monitoring her vital signs, and Marcus was standing nearby ready to catch her if she fell. She shifted her weight onto her right leg, lifted her left foot, moved it forward a few inches, and set it down again. Then she shifted her weight onto her left leg and moved her right foot forward. 2 steps, clumsy and shaky, but 2 actual steps where her own legs held her weight and moved her body forward. The shelter erupted in applause, people cheering and crying as if they had witnessed something sacred, and in a way maybe they had. Lauren collapsed after those 2 steps, exhausted from the effort, but she was smiling wider than she ever had in her life. Marcus hugged her, and Pete looked like a proud grandfather, and Angela brought her water and food. For the rest of that day, people kept coming by to congratulate her, many of them sharing their own stories of overcoming challenges. A woman who had lost her arm in an accident showed Lauren the prosthetic she had learned to use. A man who had recovered from a severe illness told her about the long rehabilitation process. A little girl who had been born deaf but received implants demonstrated the sign language she still used. They were welcoming Lauren into a community of people who understood struggle and perseverance. As Lauren's physical progress continued, she also began working on a different kind of project. She started documenting everything about the alien device and the integration process. But she did it with the intention of making the information freely available. She knew that what had helped her could potentially help millions of other people with neural conditions that human medicine could not treat. But she also knew that if she handed this technology over to corporations or governments, it would be patented and controlled and sold at prices that only the wealthy could afford. Instead, she planned to publish all her research openly, so that anyone with the skills and resources could replicate what Pete had done for her. Pete supported this decision completely, saying that knowledge should belong to humanity, not to whoever could afford to buy it. Marcus helped her prepare the documentation, organizing information in ways that would be accessible to people without advanced degrees. They included detailed scans of the device, analysis of how it worked, documentation of the integration process, and notes on the rehabilitation required afterward. Lauren knew her parents would be furious when they found out she was giving away something that could have made the family billions of credits, but she found that she did not care about their anger anymore. She had found something more valuable than wealth. She had found purpose and community and a connection to real humanity. After a month in the shelter, Lauren could walk short distances with the support of a cane that Marcus had modified for her. Her gait was unsteady and she tired quickly, but she was walking. Every step still required concentration, and probably always would to some degree. But the alien device had done what it was designed to do. It had taught her nervous system new patterns and strengthened connections that had existed only as potential. Pete said she would continue to improve for months or even years as her body adapted and learned. 6 months after publication day, Lauren stood in the plaza where she had first met Marcus. She was holding her cane but not really leaning on it, her legs now strong enough to support her for extended periods. Her gait was still not perfect and probably never would be, but she could walk several miles without exhaustion. More importantly, she had learned to walk through the world in the way Marcus had described, feeling connected to the people and places around her, touching the ground with each step both literally and metaphorically. The plaza looked different now. The lower city had been transformed by the attention and resources that had flowed in following their work with the alien technology. New clinics had opened, including one specializing in neural integration procedures. Schools had expanded their programs to include engineering courses taught by volunteers like Marcus. The community gardens had grown, and the food distribution networks had become more organized and efficient. It was not a utopia. People still struggled and suffered, but things were better than they had been. Marcus walked up beside her, returning from a meeting with city officials who were finally starting to invest in the lower city infrastructure. He was wearing new clothes that actually fit him properly, though he still had his old backpack slung over one shoulder. He had been accepted into an elite engineering program at the university, with a full scholarship and housing provided. But he still spent most of his time in the lower city, working with the foundation and helping the community that had supported him when he had nothing. They walked together through the streets, greeting people they knew. The old man George who ran the food stall waved to them, and they stopped to get soup just like they had on that first day. Pete was at the clinic supervising the integration of a new patient, but he had promised to join them later for a celebration. Angela was organizing a neighborhood meeting to discuss new initiatives. Kate and her security team were training community volunteers in safety procedures. The whole area felt alive with purpose and possibility. Lauren thought about how far she had come since that day when her transport had malfunctioned and left her stranded in this plaza. She had been so isolated then, so disconnected from real human experience. She had known facts and theories about the world but had never truly felt part of it. Marcus had offered to help her understand what it meant to walk, and in doing so, he had given her something far more valuable than just the use of her legs. He had shown her what it meant to be truly human. The foundation they had established was growing rapidly, with chapters forming in cities around the world. Other people had found alien devices in excavations and ruins, and the Foundation was coordinating research to understand and utilize these technologies responsibly. They had discovered that the ancient civilization had left behind not just neural integration devices, but tools for addressing various human needs. It was as if the aliens had foreseen that someday a species would arise that could benefit from their technology, and they had deliberately left gifts scattered around the planet. Lauren had become a voice for open access to technology and resources. She gave talks at conferences and universities, arguing that advanced tools should serve all of humanity, rather than being hoarded by the wealthy. She wrote articles and papers making the case that true progress meant lifting everyone up, not just advancing the advantages of those already on top. Some people called her naive or idealistic, but others were inspired by her message. A movement was building, people demanding a more equitable future where knowledge and technology were treated as common goods rather than private property. Her relationship with her parents had not recovered, and Lauren had accepted that it might never fully heal. They had followed through on their threat to cut her off financially, though she had not needed their money anyway. The Foundation provided enough for her needs, and she had learned to live simply. Her father refused to speak to her, viewing her choices as a betrayal of everything he had built. Her mother occasionally sent messages trying to convince Lauren to reconsider, but they had fundamentally different values now. Lauren had chosen her path, and she had no regrets. Marcus had become one of the most important people in Lauren's life, though their relationship was hard to define. He was her friend, her colleague, her teacher in many ways. He had helped her learn to walk, and she had helped him get access to education and opportunities he deserved. They balanced each other, her academic knowledge and his practical intuition combining to solve problems neither could have addressed alone. People sometimes assumed they were romantically involved, but their connection was deeper and more complex than simple categories could capture. As the sun set over New Seattle, Lauren and Marcus sat on the same bench where they had sat on that first day. Lauren looked down at her legs, still amazed sometimes that they worked, that signals traveled from her brain through pathways that had been created by alien technology. But she had learned that the real miracle was not the device itself, but what it represented. The idea that advanced civilizations might create tools not for conquest or profit, but simply to help others who would come after them. Marcus asked Lauren what she thought the aliens had been like, the ones who left the devices behind. She considered the question carefully before answering. Based on what they had learned, she thought the aliens had been a compassionate species who understood that intelligence and technology were gifts that should be shared. They had been exploring the galaxy not to exploit it, but to prepare it for future inhabitants. They had left behind tools that would only be found by species advanced enough to use them, but still struggling enough to need them. It was an act of generosity that spanned millions of years. Lauren wondered if humanity could learn that lesson. Could humans become the kind of species that left gifts for others rather than just taking what they could get? Could they build a civilization based on cooperation and sharing, rather than competition and hoarding? Looking around at the community that had formed here in the lower city, she thought maybe it was possible. These people had so little compared to the wealthy on the orbital stations, but they had something more valuable. They had each other, and they had chosen to build something better together. A young girl approached them, maybe 7 or 8 years old. She was walking with a slight limp and using a small cane, one of the youngest patients who had undergone the integration process. Her parents had brought her from across the continent after hearing about the Foundation's work. 3 months ago, she had not been able to walk at all. Now she was running and playing with other children, living a life her parents had thought was impossible. She showed Lauren a drawing she had made, a picture of people holding hands under a bright sun. The girl said it was a thank you for helping her walk. Lauren felt tears in her eyes as she looked at the drawing. This was why they had done everything, published the research, fought the corporations, stood up to government pressure. So that children like this could have chances they otherwise would never have, so that barriers between people could be broken down, so that humanity could walk forward together instead of floating above each other in isolated privilege. Marcus smiled at the girl and asked if she wanted to learn about engineering. She nodded enthusiastically, and he promised to teach her how to build things just like someone had once taught him. Lauren watched them talk and realized this was how change actually happened. Not through grand gestures or revolutionary moments, but through small acts of kindness multiplied across communities and generations. One person helping another, sharing knowledge, offering support, building connections that lifted everyone up. As night fell over the city, Lauren stood up without thinking about it, her legs responding naturally to her intention to rise. She did not need the cane for balance anymore, though she still carried it as a reminder of how far she had come. She looked out at the lights of New Seattle, the towers above and the streets below, all part of one connected city, even if the people in power tried to keep them separate. Someday, she thought, those divisions would break down completely. Someday humanity would walk forward together, not floating above the world, but moving through it with purpose and compassion. Marcus stood beside her, and together, they walked back toward the shelter that had become their home. Each step was a choice, a small act of moving forward into an uncertain future. But Lauren had learned that walking was not about certainty or perfection. It was about putting one foot in front of the other, feeling the ground beneath you and trusting that the path would become clear as you moved. It was about connection and struggle and choosing to help each other rise. She had never walked a day in her life until a homeless boy had offered to help. Not by fixing her legs, but by teaching her what walking really meant. He had shown her that humanity's greatest strength was not in the technology they built or the wealth they accumulated, but in their capacity to see each other's struggles and choose compassion. That was the gift the aliens had left. Not just a device for healing bodies, but a reminder that the most advanced civilizations were the ones that lifted everyone up together. And as Lauren walked through the streets of the lower city, surrounded by people who had become her true family, Lauren stood at the entrance to the shelter, leaning on her cane and looking out at the street beyond. She had been living here for 6 weeks now, and it had become more of a home than her family's apartment on Elysium Prime had ever been. But she knew she could not hide here forever. Her parents were demanding she return, her university was asking about her extended absence, and her security team was getting increasingly nervous about the situation. She had decisions to make about her future, decisions that would determine not just her own life, but potentially the lives of many others. Marcus sat on a bench nearby, working on a portable computer he had repaired with parts from the lower city markets. He was helping Lauren prepare the final documentation about the alien device, making sure everything was clear enough that other scientists could replicate their work. They had decided to publish the information in multiple places simultaneously, on scientific networks and public forums and distributed databases that no single organization could control or suppress. Once the information was out there, it would be impossible to stop people from using it. Pete joined them, looking tired but satisfied. He had been working almost constantly for weeks, helping Lauren with rehabilitation while also carefully documenting every aspect of the integration process. He told them that he had been contacted by several other neural engineers who had heard rumors about what they were doing, and some of them wanted to come to New Seattle to see the results firsthand. Pete thought they should invite these scientists to the shelter, let them examine Lauren and review the data. The more credible experts who could verify their findings, the harder it would be for anyone to dismiss or suppress their work. Lauren agreed, but she also knew that opening their work to outside scrutiny would bring attention they might not want. Her parents would inevitably find out what she had been doing, and they would try to take control of the situation. Corporations that owned medical technology patents would see this as a threat to their profits. Government regulators would want to shut down unauthorized medical procedures. There would be legal challenges and ethical debates and probably attempts to seize the alien device. They needed to be ready for all of that. Angela, who had been managing the shelter throughout this process, suggested they hold a community meeting to discuss what was coming. She pointed out that Lauren's presence here had already brought more attention to the lower city than usual, with security teams, and now potentially scientists and reporters coming through. The community deserved to know what they might be getting involved in, and to have a say in whether they wanted to be part of this. Lauren felt ashamed that she had not thought of that herself, so focused on her own situation that she had not fully considered the impact on the people who had welcomed her. That evening, the shelter held a meeting where Lauren explained everything to the community. She told them about the alien device, about her successful integration, and about her plan to publish the research openly. She also warned them about the attention this would likely bring, the scientists and reporters and possibly hostile corporate or government agents who might show up. She said she would understand if they wanted her to leave and conduct the rest of her work somewhere else. But the community surprised her with their response. Person after person stood up to speak in support of what Lauren was doing. A mother whose son had a neural condition said this research could change his life. A former soldier with spinal damage said he had been waiting for something like this for 15 years. An older woman pointed out that medical technology had always been controlled by the wealthy, and it was time for that to change. Angela summarized the community's feeling by saying that they had nothing to lose and everything to gain by supporting Lauren's work. If corporations or governments wanted to come into the lower city and cause trouble, well, they had been dealing with that kind of thing for years. The vote was nearly unanimous to let Lauren continue her work from the shelter and to support her publication of the research. Several people volunteered to help with security and logistics. Someone suggested they contact journalists who would be sympathetic to their cause, getting their story out before hostile parties could control the narrative. Marcus proposed they create a support network of scientists and engineers in other cities who could replicate the work independently, making it impossible to stop even if authorities shut down their operation in New Seattle. The meeting turned into a planning session for what was essentially a campaign to democratize advanced medical technology. Lauren was overwhelmed by the support and the practical help being offered. These people who had so little were willing to fight for something that might not even benefit them personally, just because they believed it was right. She promised herself that whatever happened next, she would not let them down. She would use every advantage her wealth and education gave her, not to protect herself, but to protect this community and this vision of a more equitable future. Over the next week, they prepared for what they were calling the publication day. Lauren worked with Marcus and Pete to finalize all the documentation, making sure it was thorough but also accessible. They created video tutorials showing the rehabilitation exercises. They prepared statements explaining their philosophy and their goals. They identified friendly journalists and supportive scientists who would help spread the information. And they backed everything up in multiple secure locations so that even if they were forced to stop, the knowledge would survive. Lauren also had several difficult conversations with her parents. She finally told them what she had been doing, not asking for permission but simply informing them. Her father was furious, ranting about the legal liability and the damage to the family reputation. Her mother was hurt, saying that Lauren was throwing away the advantages she had been given and associating with people who just wanted to use her. Neither of them understood that Lauren was not throwing anything away. She was finally using her advantages for something meaningful. When they threatened to cut her off financially, she told them calmly that she did not need their money anymore. She had discovered that the wealth she needed was not measured in credits. The night before publication day, Lauren took a walk through the lower city with Marcus. She still used her cane and moved slowly, but she was walking on her own feet, feeling the pavement beneath her. They passed the community garden where she had first started to understand this world. They visited the small clinic where volunteers provided care to those who needed it. They stopped at the food stall where George had served them soup on that first day. All of it was still here, people helping each other, building something better from whatever resources they could find. Marcus asked Lauren what she was going to do after tomorrow. She said she was not entirely sure, but she knew she was not going back to her old life. She could not float above the world anymore, not after learning what it meant to walk through it. She thought maybe she would stay in New Seattle and work with Pete to help other people benefit from the alien technology. Or maybe she would use her knowledge and resources to support other projects that democratized advanced technology. Whatever she did, it would be in service to the community that had given her so much more than just the ability to walk. They returned to the shelter late that night and found it buzzing with quiet activity. People were making final preparations, checking equipment, reviewing plans. There was nervous excitement in the air, the feeling that they were on the edge of something significant. Lauren felt it too, but she also felt calm. Whatever happened tomorrow, she had already won something important. She had found her place in the world, not floating above it but walking through it with people who mattered. She settled into her sleeping space, the same corner where Marcus had his small area. He had insisted she take it when she first started staying at the shelter, saying she needed more room for her equipment. Now she barely had any more space than he did, and she preferred it that way. As she drifted off to sleep, she thought about how much had changed in just a few weeks. She had come to New Seattle for another medical procedure that probably would not have worked. Instead, she had found something much more valuable: a purpose, a community, and the strength to stand on her own 2 feet in more ways than one. Publication day arrived with gray morning light filtering into the shelter. Lauren was awake early, her stomach twisted with nervous anticipation. At exactly 8 in the morning local time, the prepared documentation would go live on dozens of platforms simultaneously. Scientific journals, public forums, educational databases, and social media networks would all receive the complete information about the alien neural device and the integration process. There would be no taking it back, no way to control who saw it or what they did with it. Pete was already up, running final checks on their backup systems. Marcus was coordinating with contacts in other cities who would help spread the information and verify that it stayed accessible. Angela was managing the shelter and preparing for possible unwanted visitors. Several community members had positioned themselves at various points around the neighborhood, ready to provide warning if corporate security or government agents appeared. Everyone knew that the next few hours would determine whether their plan succeeded or failed. At exactly 8 o'clock, Lauren pressed the button that activated their coordinated publication. Within seconds, the information began spreading across networks. She watched on her monitor as downloads started, first a trickle and then a flood. Scientists around the world were accessing the data, reading her research, examining the scans of the alien device. News algorithms picked up on the story and began generating headlines. Social media exploded with reactions ranging from excitement to skepticism to anger. The first call came within 10 minutes. It was from the university where Lauren had studied, her former advisor demanding to know if she had really just published unreviewed research about alien technology and unauthorized medical procedures. Lauren confirmed that yes, she had done exactly that, and she explained her reasoning calmly and clearly. Her advisor sputtered about ethics and protocols and legal liability before Lauren politely ended the call. There would be many more calls like that, and she could not spend time arguing with everyone who was upset. The next few hours were chaotic. Reporters started showing up at the shelter, having tracked down Lauren's location through various means. Kate and her security team formed a barrier, but Angela negotiated to let a few carefully selected journalists through. Lauren gave interviews explaining what they had done and why, emphasizing that the technology should belong to everyone and not be controlled by profit-driven corporations. Marcus demonstrated some of the rehabilitation equipment he had built, showing that even the therapy techniques could be implemented with basic materials. Pete talked to scientists who showed up wanting to verify the research. Several neural engineers examined Lauren, running their own tests and confirming that the integration was real and functioning as documented. A few were critical of the methodology or concerned about the safety of using alien technology without more testing, but most were excited by the possibilities. One doctor pointed out that if this technology could be adapted to different conditions, it could help millions of people with spinal injuries, degenerative diseases, and various neural disorders. By afternoon, the situation had escalated. Corporate lawyers sent threatening messages claiming patent violations and unauthorized medical practice. Government health regulators issued statements saying the procedures were illegal and dangerous. News networks ran stories with ominous headlines about rogue scientists and alien technology. But the community had anticipated this response and they had prepared countermeasures. Friendly journalists published supportive pieces emphasizing the humanitarian aspects. Legal advocates pointed out that the alien technology predated human patents and could not be controlled by corporate claims. Scientists who had verified the research defended its validity. Lauren's parents arrived in New Seattle with their own team of lawyers, determined to take control of the situation. When they reached the shelter and saw where Lauren had been living for weeks, her mother looked horrified and her father looked furious. They demanded she come with them immediately, get proper medical evaluation, distance herself from this scandal. Lauren refused calmly, standing with her cane and facing them on her own 2 feet. She told them she was an adult making her own choices, and those choices did not align with their values anymore. Her father threatened to disown her, to cut off all financial support, to use every legal tool available to force her compliance. Lauren told him to do what he felt he needed to do, but she would not change her mind. Her mother tried a different approach, pleading with her to think about her future and her reputation. Lauren explained that she had thought about her future very carefully, and this was the path she had chosen. She was using her education and her resources to help people, which was more meaningful than anything she could have done within the constraints of her old life. The confrontation ended with her parents leaving angry and threatening legal action. Kate approached Lauren afterward and quietly told her that she was resigning from the security team. For a moment, Lauren felt betrayed, but then Kate explained that she could not work for Lauren's parents anymore, not after seeing what Lauren was trying to accomplish. If Lauren wanted, Kate would stay and provide security voluntarily, because she believed in what they were doing. Several other security team members made the same choice, forming a protective detail that worked for principle rather than payment. As evening approached, the situation began to stabilize. The information was out there, and no amount of legal threats or corporate pressure could erase it. Thousands of scientists had downloaded the data, and several research groups in different countries had already announced plans to replicate the work. A grassroots movement was forming online, people demanding that advanced medical technology be made accessible to everyone regardless of wealth. Politicians who relied on support from ordinary people were starting to distance themselves from corporate positions and call for open access to the alien technology. Marcus found Lauren sitting on the bench, outside the shelter, watching the sunset and processing everything that had happened. He sat down beside her and they were quiet for a while, just being present with each other. Finally, he told her that she had done something remarkable, not just for herself but for countless people who would benefit from this technology in the future. Lauren shook her head and said that she had only done what anyone would do if they had the resources and the knowledge. But Marcus insisted that most people with resources and knowledge chose to protect their advantages rather than share them. What Lauren had done required courage and conviction. Lauren thought about that and realized Marcus was right in a way. She had been taught all her life to think in terms of personal success and family wealth. She had been raised to see the world as a competition where you accumulated as much as possible and protected what you had. But living in the lower city had shown her a different way, a way where people shared what little they had and lifted each other up. That was the lesson she had learned from Marcus and Pete and Angela and everyone else in this community. Walking was not just about legs, it was about moving through the world with compassion and connection. The next day brought more developments. Several major medical technology companies announced they were exploring partnerships with open-source research groups to develop the alien technology responsibly. Government regulators, facing public pressure, agreed to create fast-track approval processes for neural integration procedures. Universities offered Pete positions where he could continue his research with proper support. And dozens of people with neural conditions started arriving in New Seattle, hoping to benefit from the same treatment that had helped Lauren. Lauren, Pete, and Marcus suddenly found themselves at the center of something much larger than they had anticipated. They had to quickly organize to handle the demand, training other neural engineers in the integration process, establishing safety protocols, creating support systems for patients undergoing rehabilitation. The shelter community stepped up to help, providing space and labor and emotional support. Angela coordinated volunteers and managed logistics. Kate and her team provided security and helped screen potential patients to prioritize those most in need. Within a month, they had helped 15 people begin the integration process. Some had conditions similar to Lauren's, while others had different neural issues that the alien technology might address. Not every case was successful, and they learned that the device worked better for some conditions than others. But even partial success was more than human medicine had been able to achieve for many of these patients. Each person who took their first steps or regained sensation they had lost became living proof that the technology worked and should be accessible to everyone. Lauren documented everything carefully, publishing updates and refined protocols as they learned more. She was effectively becoming the world's leading expert on alien neural technology, not because she had the most impressive credentials, but because she was doing the actual work in the field. Universities and research institutions that had initially criticized her now wanted to collaborate. Her former advisor, who had been so angry about the unauthorized publication, reached out to apologize and ask if she would consider